Board. Hey there, I am Pauletta Hansel with the Urban Appalachian Community Coalition Story Gathering Project, and I am so excited today to be talking with Staci Dennison from the Library Foundation of Cincinnati and Hamilton County. So Staci, even though I've just said your name, so I've given it away, I would like, if you don't mind, saying your name and telling us what neighborhood you live in now.
All right, I'm Staci Dennison, and I currently live in Bridgetown in Hamilton County.
Great, thank you. And where did you grow up, Staci?
So I grew up primarily in southeastern Ohio. I graduated from Crooksville High School, which is in Perry County and near Zanesville, kind of in, close to Zanesville.
Yeah. And so talk to us about what your growing up was like. Who's your family? What did you do? What did you like to do? Just kind of give us a little sense of what it was like to be Staci there in Perry County.
Well, Perry County is a big and small all at the same time. There's not a lot of folks who live in Perry County. And my family's farm was on the border between Perry and Morgan County on the Triple Nickel Highway, which is State Route 555, and just near Portersville, Ohio. And it was I went up and down that road. All my friends growing up lived on or near the State Route 555, rode horses, did a little mud running and vehicles, off-roading, and a lot of exploring. The place where my family's farm sits on top of a hill that overlooks, I guess would be the right way to put it, a ghost town. So, yeah, Santoy, Ohio, I think is still on the map technically, but it was an old coal mining town, and it was in the bottom of a valley, and it had three at one point, enough population, I guess I should say, to support 3 reservoirs, had a movie theater, had a hospital, and when the coal company moved out, it moved everything out. I think there's about half a dozen houses left, and they literally put houses on wheels and moved it to the next little burg.
Wow. When was that? When did that happen?
I want to say it was in the 20s, maybe the 30s, maybe before that. It was a wild town. So I hear tell we had a neighbor, I don't remember his last name. His name was, first name was Andy. And he was a very old gentleman when I was very young, at least how I remember him. And he grew up in Santoy and said it was quite wild. He said it was like the Wild West. He himself had gotten shot at one point, and he was doing fine as an older gentleman, but it was a little raucous in Santoy, Ohio.
Wow. I never knew that history. That's so cool. So did you guys go, when you were a kid, did you go down and explore the ghost town, or you weren't supposed to be going and check it all out?
Totally. There was one of the remaining buildings was actually the jail. It was all concrete, so they left it. And we'd go down and hang around there, and definitely go fishing in the reservoirs. And I remember even at one point, my parents took me down to the I think it was Sunday Creek, which is kind of in the bottom there, right, and would have been in the heart of town back in the day. And there were several bricks, just that were discarded, that we actually went and salvaged and used for a walkway at our house, just outside.
Cool. That's cool. So were you part of a big family?
A blended family. So my parents divorced when I was very young, and at that point, I think they lived in New Lexington, Ohio, which is the county seat in Perry County, and so I don't remember them together. But when I was about 10, by that point they had both remarried, and I had 5 half siblings within about 3 years. So
Wow.
yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so whose household was the farm, and how long had that family been there on the farm?
So my it was my dad's,
Okay.
and we had lived there from about the time I was probably 4 or 5,
Mhm.
is when they bought the farm.
Okay.
Before that, he had lived in New Lex, and he
Okay.
grew up in Cambridge,
Okay.
but
Okay.
really Lore City. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you actually went from town to rural, because it's oftentimes the people I've been talking to, it's been the other way around. But so
Yeah.
we're both sides of your family from that sort of general area, that Appalachian, Ohio area?
Yeah, my mom's family, actually, they were from around New Lexington, and her parents both grew up in a little town called Bristol. I don't even think it's a town. I think being called a town is generous,
Yeah.
but it was just outside of New Lexington, Ohio. And my father grew up in Guernsey County,
Okay.
more on a farm.
Yeah.
And my grandparents, my mother's parents, after World War II, left Perry County and moved to Dayton,
Hmm.
where she ended up growing up. And my grandfather was the first on that side, I think, to go to college. He went on the GI Bill, went to Ohio State, and was an accountant and worked at Wright-Patt Air Force
Oh,
Base for a
cool.
real long time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. So you're actually part of sort of a double migration pattern. Your mother and her and your maternal family, and then also you as well. So how did you end up in Cincinnati? Tell us your story. You obviously you went to college, and so how did you end up here?
It's my husband's fault. Um,
Okay. Well, good for him.
so we met in college, and
And
he's from Cincinnati,
where was that? What?
Great State in Dayton.
Right. Okay, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you, but
No,
so
that's
you met at Wright State.
Yep.
Yeah.
And yeah, we after we met in college, we went to and lived in DC for a little while and lived in Milwaukee, and then we're ended up both being recruited by Cincinnati Museum Center to come and work at the museum.
Okay. So what's your college background that would bring you first to the museum and then to the foundation?
Yeah, so my in college I was a political science major, so that's what I got my degree in, and had a minor in women's studies,
Okay.
which that's what took me, of course, to Washington, um, and worked in government relations for several years there, and then worked in nonprofits in
Mhm.
Milwaukee. And so between the two, when Museum Center was looking for someone in their development office that could help them with government relations as well as some grant writing, that's um, how they stumbled upon me. They actually initially wanted my husband because he had worked at the Milwaukee Public Museum in their education department and started a distance learning program there. And when they found out he was from Cincinnati on a little planning trip they had across the country, they were like, "Do you want to move back?" So the boomerang effect was in full force, and that's how we got back to Ohio. My parents, by the way, were very pleased, even though I was still 3 hours away,
Yeah.
um, that we were back in Ohio.
Yeah, a lot closer. So, Staci, did your family ever use words like Appalachian or mountain people to talk about themselves?
No, um, not my parents. My grandparents in Dayton did use a certain vernacular,
Mhm.
although they tried really hard, I think,
Mm.
not to. So
Yeah.
I was my grandmother's roommate in college, or yeah. So I lived in her basement. That was that's being a roommate is a gracious way to put it. Um, but I would catch her with just different ways that she would say things that were more um, like what I would call Appalachian or more mountain folk. So
Yeah. And how about you? I mean, it's when we started talking about all of this, you immediately sort of outed yourself as being Appalachian. So what's been your journey to kind of understanding that this is part of who you are?
I started at first doing some genealogy research. I never really thought about it um, much, even when I was living there and growing up there. You just you don't think of yourself as being something other or different.
Exactly.
We had moonshine festivals, and we had lots of talk about coal mining and the change in the economy, and a lot of jokes about rural poverty. But it wasn't until I started doing some just family research that I started to truly get an understanding of just how rich and deep that history is with both sides of my family.
Hmm. Hmm. And all Ohio, any sort of travels from West Virginia, Kentucky in your genealogy?
Yeah, so my father's family, they settled just after the War of 1812 in Guernsey and Noble counties, and they pretty much stayed there.
Yeah.
And there's still lots of folks there today. And some of the family migrated from West Virginia, and on that side, and then my mother's family, almost the same story, but they landed in Perry County, Perry and Morgan, and they some went to Indiana and came back. But yeah, I mean there's just again a real deep and rich history. I
Yeah.
never knew, even when I took it for granted, I guess I should say, when I was growing up, that um, how many cousins I had
Mhm.
in Perry County, and how many, once removed, that maybe we didn't all go to the family reunions together, but that were really part of an extended family because we had been so long served
Yeah.
in Perry County.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I'm following this too, you almost always lived sort of both rural and urban. If I mean, we can count Dayton as urban. I mean, in
Yeah,
comparison, right? So
yeah.
so how did that, any thoughts about sort of how that felt to you as a child, that kind of, or as a teen, kind of going back and forth between the communities?
I think it's for me now, as I think about it, it's the connectedness, and maybe it's because even in when I was in high school, I mean, there were like 80 people in my graduating class, in a very small K through 12 almost
Mhm.
building for the district. And everybody knew everybody. So it was truly a small town feel. And, I think as I've migrated to the city and back again, um, it, it, one thing that I've noticed about Cincinnati is it has that same small town feel.
Mhm.
My kids who have grown up here, they've known Cincinnati their entire lives. That's the only thing they've known. They will laugh sheepishly and say they can't take me any place because I will recognize someone, or someone will recognize me and say hello. And when I lived in Milwaukee, that didn't happen, and when I lived in DC, that didn't really happen either. But I think that that's I think what I've taken with me is that
Yeah.
recognition of people,
Yeah.
um, and that those relationships that I think are so important
Mhm.
when you as I've come to find out, when you live in Appalachia, you depend on
Mhm.
your neighbors for everything.
Yeah.
in some cases. They're your social network. They're your, they help you out when things go bad, and you do the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that really, I mean, what you just said is the answer to the next question, but I'll go ahead and ask it anyway in case there are other thoughts. And that is, how do you feel that your upbringing has helped make you who you are?
I think it's a couple of things. I'll take it a little bit of a different direction, too. Work ethic. I guess I never really thought that the way I show up is different from everybody else's, but I've come to find out that it is. There's just an inherent drive to get whatever it is done, and to give it your best, and stay until it's finished, which I know is, at least for my family, that's who we are. I've talked to my sister, one of my sisters and my brother, and they, as adults now, we've all had this moment at a holiday gathering, where we talk about how the world isn't, not everybody shows up that way, and how people remark even to them that it's, you're a little different. And my sister's in St. Louis now, and my brother's, he actually owns a farm in Morgan County. So, but that's more of a hobby farm. It's not his day to day.
Yeah. Yeah. So big family spread out too. That's really cool. And do your brothers and sisters, do they ever use the term Appalachian to describe themselves?
I think my sister does.
Yeah.
But honestly, I think that might have been just for a college application, because when she graduated, she wanted to go to medical school from high school, and I think there were some special scholarships that might have been available because we grew up where we grew up. I was pretty privileged in growing up. My parents had both graduated from college. It was the first on my father's side. He was the first to go in that line. But they're both teachers. So they taught at schools in New Lex and in Southern Perry County. So
yeah. Well, thank you, Staci, so much. And before we end, I just want to make sure, is there anything that you had wanted to say, or that you're thinking that you might want to say, or before we end up?
I guess the thing that I would say is the history of Southeastern Ohio and the people who live there is just so remarkable. Even today, the things that are happening there, and the journeys that people are moving through is just wonderful. So I hope that this word gets out.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing really more insight into Appalachian Ohio, into this story gathering project. I've talked to a lot of folks from West Virginia, from Kentucky, and not so much from Appalachian Ohio. And so I'm really happy to be getting your story and a little bit of the story of Perry County, or Perry County, right? Did I say
That's
that right? Yeah.
You
Okay,
did.
good. Because all of a sudden I went to Perry County, Kentucky, but it's so Perry County, Ohio. So glad to hear more about that. So this is, as you know, the Urban Appalachian Community Coalition Story Gathering Project, an interview with Staci Dennison, the director of the Library Foundation of Cincinnati and Hamilton County, who brings her own knowledge and values as being part of Ohio's Appalachian folks here to the city. So thanks so much, Staci, and we'll hope to talk to you again soon.